Oh, I didn't see you there. Come on in. Have a seat. Pour yourself a glass of Romulan ale and relax while I regale you with tales of a legendary predator. 8 years ago in 2013, a blog post appeared on the Star Trek Online website detailing the Romulan Dreadnought Warbirds, modeled after the Scimitar from Star Trek Nemesis. These vessels were, and still are, among the most powerful in the game. Sporting a 5-3 weapon layout, commander tactical seat, 5 tactical console slots, and a hangar bay, the original Tier 5 Scimitar is the perfect storm of offensive capability. No compromise, just raw power. Even after the introduction of Tier 6 with Delta Rising, the Scimitar family stayed on top. The console set, exclusive to the flagships, which we'll discuss shortly, only made them more powerful. The Khopesh is one of the only ships to appear in both my top 10 C-Store ship video and my favorite ship video. Being restricted for most of their life to Romulan captains gave that faction the edge in the DPS Cold War for a very long time. And the trait from the legendary version may very well bring that reality about again. Or will it? More on that later. But just when the galaxy needed them most, the Scimitars faded away. As the metas came and went, surfing the tides of new features, traits, gear, and the tsunami that was the Season 13 rebalance, they got lost in the crowd and faded from view. Science had asserted itself again, and the new kid on the block, Miracle Worker, gobbled up all the attention for energy weapons. The command seating on the Scimitars and the lack of a secondary deflector just felt outdated. But there would be a new dawn for a new day, and the branches of the kinetic tree would break through the canopy after simmering in the back burner for years and dominate the landscape. Going from strength to strength, the specialization that everyone looked down on was now the undisputed king. That's not all. Intel had been quietly making new friends as well. Discarded as a second-rate specialization for energy weapons, it found new life. The best Borg Doffs require Intel seating, as do the solo Elite Q stealth builds. Subsystem power has also come back into vogue, with the Discovery Shield buff scaling off of it, and the Oberth console draining aux power to supply huge boosts to torp boats. The Dalkina Strike-Wing Warbird is largely considered to be the best DPS ship in the game, or at least a top contender. It has command and intel seating. So does the Styx Dreadnought Cruiser, which relatively recently also took the DPS record. Command and intel are the new power couple in town. The stage is set, and a sleeping giant has awoken. The legendary Scimitar Dreadnought Warbird isn't a perfect ship. What I didn't tell you in that little intro is their infamously terrible inertia. Stopping on a dime is never going to be one of the praises for this ship. It's also true that the other 2 ships I just mentioned were command primary and intel secondary, which gives them access to call emergency artillery rank 3, a significantly buffed command ability that's partially responsible for the really huge parses, and the legendary Scimitar can't use it. However, those other ships are premium ships, and with a commander tactical, the Scimitar can still use Mine Dispersal Pattern Beta 3 or Attack Pattern Beta 3. So while I can't tell you it's a contender for the very best ship in the entire game in terms of parses, I think it's absolutely fair to call it the best performing ship in the C-Store, as only the legendary ones can have 2 different specialization seats, combined with the Scimitars having such strong baseline tactical stats to begin with. The legendary Scimitar also comes with 3 universal seats, giving it a very flexible layout. The chassis isn't quite perfect, but it's pretty close, and for a C-Store ship, it's top of the line. That's just the ship though. We have a whole catalog of consoles, traits, and hangar pets to discuss, so let's get started with the Tier 5 consoles. The first, Cloaked Barrage, can only be used while cloaked and allows you to fire weapons while cloaked for 15 seconds, at the expense of losing 50 weapon power when it's over. With a 1-minute cooldown, the uptime is pretty good, and the effect is rather unique. I'm not rushing off to stick it on a meta build, but it's a nice tool to have in the kit. The next console, Singularity Distributor Unit, doesn't have a clicky. Instead, it has a passive, but not the kind we're used to today. It simply allows you to keep your shields up while cloaked, and decreases the aux power penalty to cloaking. If you didn't know, cloaking isn't simply an on or off mechanic. Whether an enemy can detect you involves a multitude of mechanics including stealth rating and enemy perception. Your aux power affects the strength of your cloak. That was all a long-winded way of saying that the console also makes your cloak a bit stronger. Finally, we have the console universal secondary shields. You pretty much get what it says on the tin here. It has a clicky that gives you a massive secondary shield for 45 seconds that can absorb around 33,000 damage. I'm not sure exactly which things, if any, affect this number, but unless you're slotting it for the 3-piece bonus, I'm not sure it really matters. Speaking of the 3-piece bonus, let's talk about the Thalaron Pulse, which was significantly buffed with the release of this ship. Using it requires you to be in combat, prevents you from moving but not drifting due to inertia, and stops you from firing weapons. It also takes 12 seconds to charge. However, if you're willing to go through all this, it will fire a cone of Thalaron damage in front of you that does, let me see here, I got a note from my producer that says, a metric ass ton of damage. I need a new producer that isn't just a voice in my head. Yeah, I gotta get on that. Make no mistake, the damage is truly awe-inspiring, especially when you consider that you don't really have to do anything to get it other than have these 3 consoles slotted. It can also hit up to 20 targets and does trigger a unique animation for your ship that's pretty cool looking. The drawbacks, however, are extreme. Even a slow-moving enemy has a chance to get out of the way, and in an age where people are critting for 3 times the listed damage with a single torpedo, you're almost certainly losing way more damage in those 12 seconds than you would have gotten had you just slotted 3 better consoles and damaged things like normal, albeit in a far less fashionable way. I do appreciate the theatrics of this ability, which makes you feel like you're charging up the Death Star to blow up a planet, and if you can actually manage to hit 20 targets with it, and they live long enough to take the full radiation dot, then you can get some pretty respectable damage out of this thing. If you're looking to roleplay as the Scimitar from the movie, then this thing has you covered, and I applaud Cryptic for boosting it up for us. Onward and upward to the Tier 6 consoles, which I already covered in the Legendary Odyssey video. So if you want to go watch that video 40 or 50 times after this one, while completing the ads to the end of course, I wouldn't stop you. It will give you the Star Trek Online in-game experience of doing the same content over and over again, but just with a different ship. First up, Adaptive Emergency Systems. In my opinion, this is the best console of the bunch, and rivals the DPRM. It doesn't have the healing factor, but it does offer a lot of bonus resistance to help keep you alive, and a massive 50% Cat 2 boost across the board for 30 seconds. The only reason why you don't see this console on more builds is because it's restricted to the various flagships in the game. If this were unlocked for all ships, it'd be a top-shelf console, and certainly a top-shelf account unlock. Next we have Dampening Wave Emitter, which is an okay console saddled with the same flagship restrictions. It does a point-blank AoE radiation dot, disable, and energy weapon damage reduction. It does give you a 15% shield capacity buff as a passive. This console, it exists. Finally, we have the flagship tactical computer, which gives 19% energy weapon damage as a passive and a massive haste and maneuverability buffs to teammates for 15 seconds when using the clicky. This is a very powerful console if you're using energy weapons, and good for energy weapon nannying as well. It's not as versatile or as adaptive as Adaptive Emergency Systems, but the 2-piece gives some crit chance, so I'd recommend using them together if it makes sense for your build. And now we move on to the trait portion of the proceedings. First up, the legacy stuff. We have Adaptive Hull Plating, which gives you 5% extra hull when using hull healing or command abilities, stacking up to 15%. Did I mention that the stacks have a limited duration? Even if it just flat out gave you 15% hull capacity with no requirements or expiration, it would still be bad for a starship trait. Sadly, this is a real clunker. Moving on to supercharged weapons, which actually is a pretty decent trait. Firing torpedoes gives you Cat 1 damage, crit chance, and crit severity for energy weapons. If you're the kind of player who likes to run a single torpedo on their beam boats, then this trait is right up your alley. The buffs are pretty good, and it still stands up even today in 2021. The last legacy trait is Checkmate. I feel that this trait currently has the most going for it than it ever has in a long time. Using a Bridge Officer control ability gives you 30% Cat 1 exotic damage and 30% Cat 1 projectile damage. As it happens, the legendary Scimitar is included in a bundle that also has the legendary D'Deridex. The trait from that ship, and we'll get to it in its own video, is very good for torpedo builds and depends on tractor beam to activate it. What this means is that torpedo boats are now running tractor beam, which triggers checkmate. And since checkmate buffs mines as well as torpedoes, it's actually not half bad, especially as an account unlock. Finally, we come to the new trait. She's a predator. I said before in my long and pretentious introduction segment that this trait could re-establish Romulan superiority, maybe. That's because it gives you a Cat 2 damage boost equal to your ambush bonus, along with some healing and cloak cooldown when you use an attack pattern ability, limited to once per 30 seconds. Some restrictions may apply, void in Delaware, Michigan, and Kentucky. It doesn't just give you a damage boost equal to your ambush bonus, which if you don't know is the bonus you get when decloaking. It also interacts with things that affect ambushing. We talked a moment ago about how the stealth component of cloaking is complicated, and that goes for other components of cloaking as well. Since cloaking is one of the things Romulans are known for, they get extra cloak-related stuff. Specifically, they're the only faction to have access to bridge officers with the Infiltrator trait, which increases the duration of your ambush buff. There are 3 versions, regular, improved, and superior, and they all stack, allowing you to keep the bonus damage for nearly 30 seconds. Normally, this isn't a big deal. You have to decloak in order to get a benefit out of it. Few ships have a battle cloak, and even the ones that do aren't cloaking and decloaking all the time. It also directly competes, in most cases, with the Romulan operative trait, which gives crit chance and severity. However, with this new trait, you don't need to cloak and decloak in order to get the bonus damage. This means you can maintain your ambush bonus virtually 100% of the time, simply by doing things you were going to do anyway. I can hear the detractors already. Ambush damage on most cloaks is only 15%. Is a 15% Cat 2 boost really that crazy for a starship trait? Isn't it nearly as easy to get a 20% Cat 2 boost with onboard dilithium recrystallizer? You know, assuming you aren't using your weapons or aux power or anything. Yes, but did I mention that Maquis Tactics' personal space trait also exists? It increases your ambush damage by an extra 10%, bringing the total on most ships up to 25%. That sounds pretty good to me. But you have to give up Romulan operatives in order to get the extended duration, and a personal space trait for Maquis Tactics, so there is an opportunity cost, and the bonus damage isn't that much crazier than you can get with other options that haven't broken the game. You also have to be playing as a Romulan Republic character. Find the 3 boss with the appropriate traits, and give them training manuals so you can actually use them. That may incur some extra expense, not only finding the boss, but getting those lockbox training manuals. Getting the maximum value out of this trait is hardly without effort or trade-off. You could argue that it gives Romulan captains a distinct advantage, and that's technically true, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. It's a relatively small advantage at best, and when it comes to the super huge DPS parses, there are lots of other factors that can easily drown out something like this. I doubt the average player would even notice the difference between this and, say, Promise of Ferocity, especially if they aren't doing 90-second ISE parses. This is a great trait if you're playing a Romulan captain and you have the wherewithal to get it set up, but it's not going to break the game or suddenly make everyone re-roll to a Romulan. If people haven't done that already for the superior Romulan operative trait, then I can't imagine they're going to do it over this trait. And now we can talk about the Hangar Pets. The original Scimitars came equipped with Scorpion fighters, but had the option to use the drone frigates. Eventually they added squadron versions of the Scorpions to the game, and the introduction of the legendary version has added support for the Malum support frigates. I'm going to be covering all of them. My goal in looking at these pets is not to rate them based on the current meta, which excludes the vast majority of pets because they have a torpedo, and give them a more robust evaluation instead. First up, the Scorpions. I've already done an entire video, albeit a very short one, on these pets. There are some of the most fun pets in the game, and because you can get them through the reputation system, also some of the cheapest, at least the elite versions. I think you'll want the elite versions too, because they have a very amusing combination of plasma torpedo and torpedo high yield, which causes them to fire big green destructible balls of death larger than they are. Once you account for these high yields in the parser, which are listed separately in some cases from the pets because they are unique entities, they also do pretty respectable damage. They may seem a bit pedestrian compared to the frigate options, but they're thematic, great performers, and put on a nice little light show with their death orbs. The squadron versions are essentially just a cosmetic alternative. They fancy themselves as 6 individual pets per fighter slot, but in reality you still only get 6 entities. They perform the same and even have the same weapons, including the high-yield plasmas. The only real difference, and therefore the only thing to make a choice based on, is whether you prefer the appearance of a large squadron of pets all firing on your target, or a small one. Both are excellent choices. The squadrons aren't better, they're just different. Let's take a look at the Malum frigate before we get to the most iconic pet for the Scimitar. The Malum support frigate was added to the game with the support carrier bundle, and you still need to own either that bundle or some version of the Romulan one. If anyone knows how to correctly pronounce the name of that ship, please let me know. Once you have them unlocked, however, you can use them on any of the Scimitar variants. This is unique because until now, all the support frigates were restricted to ships with 2 hangar bays. Why might you want to use them? Well, they're essentially mini nanny craft you can keep in your pocket. They have captain abilities in addition to bridge officer abilities, buff you and your allies, and debuff enemies. They don't have a gravity well, but I'm not sure we want to trust the AI with a gravity well anyway. In my opinion, the support frigates are some of the coolest pets in the game, so this change gets a big thumbs up for me. Without further ado, let's look at the Romulan drone ships. If you're a fan of Enterprise, the TV show, not the ship, you might recognize these. They appear in several episodes near the end of the series. In those episodes, this ship is remotely piloted by a telepath and uses holo emitters to disguise itself as other ships. This was an effort to stop Archer and crew from building the initial Federation alliance between the Tellarites, Andorians, and humans. The ship would make itself look like a Tellarite vessel and attack the Andorians, and vice versa. This is the reason why these pets transform into frigate versions of other ships after you launch them. I've seen quite a bit of confusion about this on the internet over the years, where people understandably think it might be a bug. All jokes aside, it's actually a feature. That's all good and well, but how do they perform? As it turns out, pretty damn well. Just looking at the list of weapons and abilities is a poor indicator of quality when it comes to Hangar Pets. You kinda just have to test them and find out. The Callisto frigates look like total badasses on paper, but end up being paper tigers in practice. The drone ships, on the other hand, like the Kelvin drones and the Jem'Hadar bug pets, are really excellent at doing DPS. Unless you're doing a torpedo build and you don't want them to take all the concentrate firepower buffs, or you aren't a fan of them changing their appearance, I highly recommend them. And now we come to the scores. In terms of performance, I give the legendary Scimitar an effortless 5 stars. The combination of command and intel seating is at its zenith right now in terms of power, and the overall base configuration of the ship is simply astounding. The mastery package could be a tiny bit better, and the maneuverability isn't the best, but honestly, you have to go pretty far out of your way to find complaints. It even has 3 universal seats for Q's sake. This thing is just a monster. In terms of accessories, there's a lot to digest. The problem with wrapping it all up into one score is that it has to account for a huge disparity in quality. The adaptive hull plating trait is definitely a 1-star trait, but the adaptive emergency systems console is easily 5 stars. The way I normally resolve this is by taking the highest score anything would have received and using that, which works well with only a couple of items. I'm still going to do that here, so the accessory score is 5 stars, but I feel the need to recap what the good stuff is. Specifically the new trait, She's a Predator, emergency adaptive systems, flagship tactical computer, and supercharged weapons. Checkmate and dampening wave emitter are probably 3-star territory, and everything else falls below that. The buff Thalaron Pulse is a joy to use, and all of the Hangar Pet options are good. In conclusion, the legendary Scimitar lives up to its weighty lineage and reputation, a ship that was legendary even without an official moniker from Cryptic. The newest version is an upgrade across the board in my opinion, and comes with all the customization options if you don't already own the older ships. I still prefer the original Scimitar skin myself, although the new adapted one is probably my second favorite. If you're looking to get into meta-kinetic builds, this is, in my opinion, the very best C-Store ship you can get, and competes with the best premium ships out there. The value is here, the performance is here. That's the Scimitar way. Raw power, no compromise, Apex Predator.